nature is in Earth and humans, some organizing life around. This is a chart that detects through a particular isotope of oxygen what allows life. The variations in Earth temperature over the last thousands of years, 100,000 years ago. And you can see that over the last 12,700 years, the variation has been quite minimal. We've been more or less stable. This is the time where humans have settled. We started agriculture, we started to build cities, we started architecture. And over the last 12,700 years, during the Holocene, the recent age of geological time, there's been almost no variation in the environment. Today, we're entering a radical new situation. It's not just climate change. Today, scientists are actively debating and articulating the thesis that we have changed the Earth system. We have changed the microscopic level of the Earth system. We have changed the molecular cycles of carbon. We've changed the molecular cycles of nitrogen. It used to be that a tree will decompose and form compost, and that will form the further nutrients. We've added to that cycle enormous amounts of nitrogen produced in chemical compounds that have now completely altered that molecular cycle. But we've also changing world systems at a molar level, not only at the microscopic molecular level, but at the molar level, at the large compounds. Economy, capitalism, is also entering a rapid fluctuation. In the 30s, a Russian economist was trying to chart over the long-term variations of economies over the last 300 years, somehow regularities, the so-called Kondratiev curves. Somehow the ups and downs of economy and capitalism are well beyond our notion of intervention. It's not only bust and boom. We are entering what scientists call the great acceleration. Global energy consumption over the last 200 years. You see that in our lifespan, we've more than doubled the energy consumption. But what is interesting is that we can analyze the global energy also as a succession of territories, as a succession of specific forms of shaping human life on this planet. After the complete depletion of wood, we moved on to exploit coal. After having exploited coal, we moved on to nuclear and oil. Now we are moving on to renewables. And each one of these rapid transitions, these waves, these almost Kondratiev curves, is engaged and tucked into the specific forms that we give to our settlements, to our institutions, to our polities, to our particular forms of life. From the city-state to the parliamentary state, to the international, to globalization.
So it is, if you take those, the Earth system and the world system, the Earth system is really, what is the planet? What is it made of? It's the geosphere, it's the biosphere, and it's the atmosphere. That's what scientists think. And then the world system is everything that we do on the planet, if you consider the planet. And with DIP4, we think that the territories are emerging in between at the conjunction of these two systems.
At DIP4, we investigate these transformations, these territorial transformations engendered by the bringing together of the Earth system and the world system along the material forms of the coast of Europe, along that set of peninsulas that stretch out of the Eurasian structures. We look at these transformations considering their origin, their genealogy, both from beneath the state, above the state, and across the state. We look and try to detect what are the consequences for agriculture, of agricultural extension, of industrialization of tourism, reorganization of supply chains, the introversion of compounds, both of resource but also of knowledge production industries. And we try to understand that these are transformations that somehow are locked into the forms of material structures, are locked into the forms of contemporary space. These are transformations that have long origins. The enclosures of Britain, that mobilize an entire population away from their agricultural land in order to allow somehow the construction of a new world system. The colonial structures that went out and reorganized plantations and territories through architecture. Today, plantations and territories are not in order to produce food, they are there to cut trees in order to create biofuel, to create more energy. The majority of land grabs are originating still in the West.
Europe's landform is marked by two vast depressions to the north and the south, flooded by the oceans to form two parallel chains of seas that penetrate deep into the interior. The European peninsula, with its outreaches, bays, meanders, and straits, is a unique set of environments, urban structures and political organizations in constant transformation. It is defined in the north by the North Sea to Baltic Sea lane that connects the Atlantic to Russia. In the south, the Mediterranean, the Black Sea chain stretches from Gibraltar to the Caucasus. Your work will address the potentialities of architecture to address the challenges that Europe is facing in the 21st century. We will operate directly in the field, using design to evaluate, test, analyze, and instigate the current state of affairs of Europe's inhabited territories. This image shows a collection of projects that your colleagues have developed with us at DIP4.
Last year, Stavros Papavassiliou engaged the pervasive forms of compounds to address the complex negotiation systems and the territorial structures in the Eurasian steppe, looking at the structures of the spaces populated by oligarchs, by small, powerful groups in the vast plains of Europe. He identified the compound not as a side marginal product of industrialization of contemporary urbanization, but at the very site through which very specialized knowledge, very segmented knowledge, relays across vast spaces to other compounds. So you are always within a compound communicating with another compound. And today, contemporary space operates more like a relay chain rather than a territorial condition, like a vast expanse. The transformation of the connection between Europe and Asia are reflected by two vast set of changes that mark the peninsula, both in the north and in the south. A deep space that has to do with intensification more than extension. Intensities that we want to detect, articulate, and try to govern. We will follow the deep space in the production of migrations. We'll follow how contemporary forms of sophisticated capitalism are engendering vast expulsions of populations, vast expulsion of life, for instance, from the sub-Sahara Africa that generate the migration flows to the north that are then tried to detect and somehow modulated when they reach the so-called European fortress. The deep spaces of the European project are well beyond the marginal continent. They extend deep into the surfaces of the planet. The large project organized by the Russian that was studied last year by Alexander Shukov to reorganize nature during the Soviet time by intensifying irrigation at the Aral led to the complete dissipation of the lake. The particular conjunction between the Earth and the world systems, where is most probably visible in the management of water structures. These are the United Nations programs that try to help people by organizing more and more irrigation. This is an example of one very large funded project by the UN, this Lake Assad in Syria. And these are the pipelines that try to bring water in the Tigris and Euphrates region of Iraq. There's a little gun in the corner. These structures of long-term inhabitation of the Holocene are now completely up for grabs. We are entering a completely different structure. We are no longer just trying to inhabit the long-term structures of construction. For instance, these are kilns along the Tigris and Euphrates in order to burn the clay, in order to build, to make bricks, to build. Somehow they are reminding us that today those very infrastructures, those very systems of construction, those very architectures are contested. They are the war sites of contemporary life. Lake Assad was recently taken by IS. So the particular structures that are operating at the edge of Europe, in the shadow of the European project, are what interests DIP4. We're interested in understanding the consequences in the material spaces, in the physical spaces of human instigations and choices. These are the environmental detection of chlorophyll from satellite images in the swathe of hydrological projects in the Tigris and Euphrates Dam. It's one of the few borders that you can detect from satellite. In the north, the intense red shows the rapid intensification of agriculture given by the GAP project, the Anatolian project of Turkey, linked to the organization of farms. In the south, you start seeing darker, browner tones with the abandonment of one of the oldest structures of inhabitation on the planet. We follow these structures and try to understand their pattern. We try to understand the particular form. We try to understand the form not only at one point in time, but as they develop through time. Trying to understand how urbanization processes are linked to these processes of erosion, processes of intensification of fertilization, and so on. And we try to always link those material detections to institutional analysis. In this case, the Treaty of Paris that formed the European Union after the Treaty of Rome, an organization there to structure the economy of energy, the economy linked to the particular structures of energy, that somehow 50 years later folds back onto a particular site in the south of Italy, in Taranto, where all the industrialization processes somehow goes out of hand. The major site of environmental depletion that Manuele Gaioni last year investigated with us in understanding how sectoral rationalities were no longer capable of overarching structures. One of the sites of major reconstruction. In the north flank of the European peninsula, we are assisting to probably the most exciting experiment in democracy of the latest part of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. It's a very simple map that links the Sami parliament to the Scottish devolved territories, to the devolution of Northern Ireland, the new constitution of Iceland, the new rule in Greenland, the new formation of a new land province in Canada. At the same time, these experiments are entangled with rapid transformation of industrial complexes. Access to resources, access to knowledge, science, are changing the territories of the north, especially the Arctic and the subarctic region, both in the European side and in the Canadian and Alaskan side, to an intensity that was never experienced before. Somehow, to know more is creating a situation where we are changing more. The scientific experiments are modifying the knowledge structures.
So another project from the north, where Graham last year designed new forms to delimit jurisdictions in the transcontinental grid of Canada, the US, and the European Union. This grid is being intensified by the recent trade agreements.
In the shadow of the European project, actually behind the scenes of the last G8 meeting in St. Petersburg, Barroso and Harper met in order to change the law. Not only there was a new organization of trade agreements that allowed the European Union and Canada and North America to become one large organization of territory in relation to intellectual property rights, but those intellectual property rights were taken away from environmental protection and straight into economical development management. So what we have is a situation where the more you trade in information, the more you change the planet. The more scientists try to explore, for instance, the sounding of the planet in order to organize the echoing, the seismic lines, in order to see whether there might be or not some natural resources, most probably petrol and tar, the more we cut the forest, the more we destroy the biosphere, the more we reorganize things. And at the same time, every single line that you're seeing on the screen, which is somehow 7 meters in width, represents a moment of withdrawal, of expulsion of rights, expulsion of environmental protection, expulsion of entire archives that are burned in order not to deal somehow with the problems of contemporary intensifications. These are processes that have a long tail, that start long in advance, far earlier than you might see them appearing. So what we are seeing is just glimpses, just elements of a very dark, new form of territories that is appearing above us when you look at the European project. They have long history, but they also have intense history. We are intensely monitoring the planet to a level that we've never experienced before. We can detect the minute changes in coverage of the ice in Greenland. We can detect, for instance, a multispectral analysis in red, green, and blue, 30 years of change using Landsat transformation. We can detect the intensification of mining extraction and mineral extraction in the up reaches of the Kola Peninsula next to Murmansk. We can understand the complete abandonment of industrial landscapes next to, say, between St. Petersburg and Leningrad, let's put it like this. In that stretch of land, almost 5 kilometers wide, that connects the neoclassical city to the communist development of housing. We can understand the very intense transformation of European logistics centers. We can understand the implications and long-term implications of architectural projects. We can understand the transformation of coastlines, the abandonment of coastlines, the transformation in systems. No? Red, green, blue, the 3 colors of, say, electronic projection merged into this very complex stratigraphic conditions, the urbanization processes, and the lock-in factors. Last year,
Roland investigated how new ways of measuring nature through remote sensing are defining the new territories of contemporary work and landscape in post-colonial Portugal.
Sorry for the glitch. The way in which we try to manage, govern, organize, institutionalize transformation of the landscape is so tucked into the European project that we somehow no longer can distinguish forms apart from the regulation that we've built around those distinctions. So form on one side is detected as landscape, as agricultural spaces, industrial spaces, urbanized areas, industry, and so on. Roland tried to detect the construction of Corinne, the largest and most evil element of land classification, the dreaded zoning, and tried to understand that today it makes no sense to distinguish urban and landscape. Those are distinctions that were good maybe in the 18th, 19th century. Maybe in the last part of the 20th century for some romantic soul. Today, the red of urbanization and the green of natural classification is undistinguishable. Today, the circulation of capital are no longer distinguishable in the two sides. The circulation of global connections are no longer distinguished from attempts to form independent communities. The idea of the anti-political and the political are merging. The idea of action is changing. And this is where we would like to engage with you during the year, to think new forms of institutionalizing these changes, of trying to invest some of the intelligence that architecture still carries over this period and try to understand what can be addressed.
We're the product of a United Nation of the Earth, basically, for which Gaia would be the...
I wouldn't doubt that the United Nations will evolve over the next 20 to 25 years because it will need to do so to be able to still shepherd these new level of responsibilities that are coming on our plate now. Having said that, I firmly believe that because of the urgency of climate change, it has to be addressed by the institution that we have right now, which is the institution of the United Nations. Imperfect as it is, and complicated and insufficient solutions as have come out of it. But we actually do not have the luxury of time to wait for the evolution of the United Nations, which would take 20, 25, 30 years, and then to be able to use a stronger, more planetary-focused institution for a planetary problem. Because 20 to 30 years from now, it'll be too late. I actually think it's the other way around. I actually think because we're using this institution as it is now, created for something completely different, right? It was not created for planetary solutions. It was not created for that. But we're using that because that is the best that we have right now. And by using that for these planetary solutions, that will be...
This was Cristiana Figueres in conversation with Bruno Latour, like a short glimpse of an upcoming big exhibition that is going to open in a couple of weeks in Berlin. To recapitulate, we're interested in oscillation, diversion, severance, and understanding more and more about them in order to be able to act on them. Knowing very well that action is up for grabs as much as the knowledge of those transformations. We are eager to start a new year working on these issues with you. We are Dip4. I'm John.
And I'm Ann-Sofi, so welcome to Dip4.